The scent of crushed lilies and beeswax candles was thick enough to choke on. It was the smell of my wedding, a fragrance I had once dreamed would be the sweetest of my life. Now, it was just cloying. The heavy silk of my crimson gown, embroidered with threads of real gold, felt less like a garment and more like a suit of armor. Through the delicate pearls dangling from my phoenix coronet, I looked at the man standing beside me. Lord Caelan Silverwood. My almost husband. He was every maiden's fantasy carved from living marble. Chiseled jaw, eyes the color of a summer sky, and a smile that had once made my foolish heart stutter. Tonight, that smile was absent. His gaze, usually so warm upon me, was fixed on the great oaken doors of the grand September, as if willing them to burst open. A faint tremor ran through the hand that held the other end of our scarlet matrimonial ribbon. I had mistaken it for nerves. The eager tremble of a happy groom. I knew better now. The high priest's voice droned on, a sonorous hum weaving through the expectant silence of the assembled nobility. Every duke, every count, every powdered and perfumed lady of the Sun King's court was here to witness the union of House Blackthorn, the most powerful family in the realm, with House Silverwood, its most promising rising star. My father, the Prime Minister, sat in the place of honor, his expression one of quiet, satisfied pride. He had chosen Caelan for me, yes, but he had taken care to ensure I loved him first. A political match that felt like a love match. He believed he had given me the world. He had no idea he was signing my death warrant. A memory, sharp and searing, lanced through my mind. Not a memory of this day, but of another life. Asterisk the smell of smoke. Not lilies, but burning timber and my own charring flesh. The heat, unbearable, licking at my skin. And Caelan, standing beyond the flames, his face illuminated not by passion, but by a cold, vengeful fury. His voice, a whip-crack in the roaring inferno, for Alara. A life for a life, Lyra. You and your entire line will pay for what you took from me. Asterisk I swayed on my feet, my knuckles whitening around the bridal fan. The vision was so visceral, so real, that the opulent September seemed to swim before my eyes. It wasn't a daydream. It was a ghost. It was my ghost. I had lived this before. The wedding. The betrayal. The long, dutiful marriage where I played the fool, the rise to power, and the final, horrific end. I had been reborn, my soul shoved back into this young, hopeful body, seconds from making the worst mistake of her life, again. And Caelan. I looked at him, truly looked. The tension in his shoulders wasn't nerves. It was impatience. The distant look in his eyes wasn't awe. It was calculation. He kept glancing subtly towards a small, ornate water clock in the corner. Asterisk he knows. Asterisk the realization was an ice-cold dagger in my gut. Asterisk he has been reborn too. And he's counting down the minutes until he can abandon me. Asterisk he wasn't planning a future with me. He was planning a rescue mission for his precious Alara. Alara Nightingale. His childhood sweetheart, the daughter of a disgraced lord whose crimes would be discovered tonight. Whose family would be stripped of everything at the stroke of midnight and marched towards exile at dawn. In our last life, she had come to him, desperate, on our wedding night. He had tried to make her his concubine, a request I had foolishly thwarted, setting in motion a chain of resentment that ended with me screaming in a pyre of my own making. Not this time. And do you, Lord Caelan of House Silverwood, the high priest's voice boomed, pulling me back to the present, swear to honor, protect, and cherish this woman, Lyra of House Blackthorn, from this day until your last? The entire September held its breath. This was the moment. Caelan's eyes snapped to mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of something, not love, not even regret, but a frantic, desperate apology. He opened his mouth. He began, then his voice failed. He cleared his throat, his grip on the scarlet ribbon tightening until his knuckles were bone white. Then, with a sudden, violent motion, he flung the ribbon away. The silk, a symbol of our bound futures, fluttered to the marble floor like a wounded bird. A collective, sharp gasp echoed through the hall. My father shot to his feet. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. I cannot, Caelan said, his voice low but carrying to every corner of the stunned silence. Forgive me. There is an urgent matter. A matter of life and death. He didn't even look at me. His gaze was already back on the doors. He took a step away from the altar, then another. Insolent whelp. My father's roar shattered the quiet. The power in that voice had made seasoned generals tremble. Where do you think you are going? I knew exactly where he was going. To play the hero for his doomed lover. To arrive at the Nightingale estate just as the royal guard did, to sweep in and save the day, to claim his prize without the inconvenient burden of a Blackthorn wife. He finally turned, his face a mask of pained resolve. Lord Blackthorn, I will explain upon my return. The matter cannot wait. His eyes then flicked to me, dismissive, impatient. Lyra. Be good. Wait for me. I will return to complete the ceremony. The condescension in his tone, the command in his voice, it was the tone of the powerful minister he would become, used to being obeyed without question. The man I had helped create was already speaking to me as if I were a subordinate. The shock in the room was palpable. Whispers began to rise, a tide of scandalized excitement. I saw it all through a new, cold lens. The pitying looks, the hidden smirks. They were waiting for me to crumble. To weep. To become the tragic jilted bride, a story to be gossiped about over tea for years to come. I let the bridal fan in my hand fall. It clattered sharply against the marble, a sound like breaking bone. Every eye snapped to me. I did not weep. I did not plead. With a slow, deliberate grace, I reached up and untied the pearls of my coronet. I let it drop, too. Then, I looked straight at Kaelin, my voice cutting through the whispers like a shard of glass. Lord Kaelin, I said, and my tone was not one of heartbreak, but of icy, formal inquiry. Are you, before all these witnesses, abandoning this marriage? My father stared at me, his fury momentarily eclipsed by confusion. This was not the reaction of his heartbroken daughter. Kaelin stopped, his back to me, his shoulders stiff. He half-turned, a frown of profound irritation on his handsome face. Lyra, I do not have time for your theatrics. Behave. We will speak when I return. He thought I was throwing a tantrum. A spoiled child denied a toy. A cold smile touched my lips. Oh, Kaelin. You have no idea what I have become. Adrian, I said, my voice dropping, yet carrying an unmistakable edge of steel. I do not care what urgent business you claim to have. If you do not explain yourself to me, to my father, and to this entire assembly right now, you will not take another step out of this September. I gave a subtle nod. From the shadows near the pillars, 4 of my personal guards, men loyal to House Blackthorn, not Silverwood, moved to block the great doors. They stood, impassive, their hands resting on the pommels of their swords. The crowd gasped again. This was unprecedented. This was thrilling. Kaelin's eyes widened in sheer disbelief, then narrowed in anger. Lyra, must you make a scene at a time like this? This is nonsense. We will talk later. He tried to shoulder past my guards, but they stood firm, a wall of muscle and resolve. Under the gaze of hundreds, he could not force his way through without looking like a brute. It was then I played my card. I let my voice tremble, just a little. I let a sheen of tears gloss my eyes, not tears of sorrow, but of manufactured, perfect fury. Very well. If you will not give me the courtesy of an answer, I will discover it for myself. I turned to the assembled nobles, my chin held high. I ask you all, my lords and ladies, to bear witness. Come with me. Let us all see what matter of such earth-shattering importance compelled Lord Silverwood to shame House Blackthorn and defy the traditions of the crown. A ripple of excitement went through the crowd. A scandal was one thing, a guided tour to the heart of the scandal was irresistible. Without a backward glance at my stunned would-be in-laws, I gathered the heavy skirts of my wedding gown and swept down the aisle, my head high, my guards clearing a path. The nobles, after a moment of hesitation, surged after me, a river of silk and velvet following the jilted bride in crimson. Kaelin stared, utterly bewildered, as his meticulously planned, quiet escape turned into a circus with me as the ringmaster. I felt his horrified gaze on my back as I passed through the doors he so desperately wanted to cross. The game had changed. The pawn was off the board. The player had taken the field. And the first move was mine. The cool night air of the capital was a slap in the face, a welcome antidote to the stifling perfume and hypocrisy of the September. Behind me, the grand wedding procession had warped into a chaotic, murmuring tide of nobles, their whispers hissing through the darkness like serpents. I didn't look back. My gaze was fixed ahead, my steps sure and swift on the cobblestones, my crimson wedding gown a banner of defiance leading them on. My guards, a solid, silent presence at my flanks, guided the way. They knew the destination without my having to utter a word. I had made certain of that this morning. A quiet instruction passed along with a purse of silver that promised more for their discretion. While I had been dressed and preened for my sacrifice, I had already set the first pawns on the board. Lyra! Stop this madness! The voice was Kaelin's, strained and furious. He had broken free from the sept and was pushing his way through the crowd behind me. I could hear the desperation in his tone. This was not his plan. In his reborn arrogance, he had imagined a clean, dramatic exit, a secret mission of love. He hadn't accounted for me becoming an active obstacle. I did not stop. I did not slow. Let him chase me. Let him feel the first stirrings of the panic he had so freely given me. Where is she leading us? Someone in the crowd asked, their voice tinged with excitement. To the Nightingale quarter, by the look of it, another answered, a knowing, scandalized lilt in their words. The name Nightingale passed through the crowd like a spark on a trail of gunpowder. The pieces were beginning to click into place for them. Lord Nightingale's rumored financial troubles, his risky ventures, and his beautiful daughter, Alara, who had shared a childhood with Kaelin Silverwood. Whispers of a youthful romance, long thought buried under the more advantageous match with House Blackthorn, now resurfaced with a vengeance. We turned a corner, and the scene unfolded before us like a perfectly staged play. The Nightingale Manor, once a respectable if modest estate, was a vision of controlled chaos. Torches held by stone-faced members of the Royal Guard cast flickering, ominous shadows on the pale stone facade. The main doors were wide open, and within, I could see servants huddled together, their faces pale with fear. A senior guardsman stood on the steps, a scroll of parchment held aloft, his voice ringing out into the night as he read the imperial decree. And for the crimes of high treason and embezzlement from the royal treasury, the estate of Lord Theron Nightingale is hereby forfeit to the crown. All members of the immediate household are to be stripped of titles and properties and shall be exiled to the silver mines of Frostfall at first light, and there, at the foot of the steps, was the climax of my little drama. Kaelin, having sprinted ahead of the main crowd, stood facing the guards. And tucked against his side, her face buried in his doublet, was Alara. She was the picture of tragic beauty. Her simple, elegant gown, so different from my opulent wedding robes, was a testament to her fallen state. Her dark hair tumbled in artful disarray, and her slender shoulders shook with perfectly timed sobs. I told you, Kaelin was declaring to the captain of the guard, his voice loud and clear, projecting for an audience he didn't yet realize was there. She is under my protection. I claim her as my concubine. By the laws of the Sun King, she is no longer a member of this condemned house. The guard captain, a grizzled veteran, looked unimpressed. The paperwork must be filed with the magistrate, Lord Silverwood. My orders are to take the entire family into custody. You will not lay a hand on her. Kaelin snapped, his arm tightening around Alara. It was then that he turned, sensing the profound silence that had fallen over the street. His eyes, blazing with self-righteous fury, swept over the scene he had been too preoccupied to notice, dozens of the most powerful people in the realm, standing in their finest silks and jewels, watching him. And at their head, stood me. Our eyes met. His widened in dawning horror. The script had been torn up, and he was center stage in a tragedy of my making. I let the silence stretch, a taut wire of anticipation. I made sure every person present saw the scene as I did, the disgraced lord's daughter, clinging to the man who had just abandoned his wedding. The heroic posturing that now looked like profound foolishness. Then, I let my own performance begin. I brought a hand to my chest, my fingers trembling. I squeezed my eyes shut, not to block out the sight, but to force the tears that were stubbornly refusing to come. When I opened them, I made sure they were glistening in the torchlight. Kaelin, I whispered, my voice a broken thread of sound that carried in the utter quiet. I let it strengthen, laced with a heartbreak that was both real for the girl I had been and a weapon for the woman I had become. So this is the urgent matter that could not wait? You left us, at the altar for this? I gestured towards Alara, who peeked out from the shelter of Kaelin's arm, her eyes wide with genuine shock and a flicker of fear. You abandoned your vows to take a concubine? I infused the word with all the scorn and devastation I could muster. I let the tears I had manufactured trace hot paths down my cheeks. They were not for him, but for my own lost innocence, for the pain of the flames. Let the crowd interpret them as they wished. I saw the impact on the faces around me. Pity hardened into disgust. Scandalized curiosity turned into condemnation. They were seeing a man so enslaved by infatuation that he would spit on the most powerful family in the kingdom and make a mockery of his own wedding. Kalen's mouth opened and closed. Lyra, it is not what it. I can explain, but I was done with his explanations. I had heard them all in a past life. She is like a sister to me. It is only to save her life. I only love you. Lies, all of them. I drew myself up to my full height, the phoenix-less coronet leaving my dark hair flowing freely down my back, a symbol of my newfound, unbound state. I looked from Kalen's stricken face to the captivated, judging audience. Then I see the truth of your heart, Lord Silverwood, I said, my voice clear and cold, cutting through the night. And I will not stand in the way of such a profound attachment. I let the pause hang, letting the irony sink in. Fine. If this is what you desire, then I grant you your wish. I took a final, sweeping look at him, imprinting this image of his public ruin into my mind. This was the first portrait in my gallery of vengeance. The engagement is broken, I announced, not to him, but to the world. From this moment forward, House Blackthorn and House Silverwood are severed. We have nothing more to do with each other. With a swirl of crimson silk that felt lighter than air, I turned my back on him. I did not run. I did not stumble. I walked away, head high, leaving him standing in the wreckage of his own making, holding his concubine before the eyes of the entire court. The walk back through the crowd was a blur of bowed heads and averted eyes. No one dared to speak to me. I was no longer the jilted bride to be pitied, I was a force of nature to be feared. As I reached the edge of the crowd, I heard the first clear, condemning whisper, sharp as a dagger. To choose a traitor's whore over the Prime Minister's daughter, the man is a fool. A small, cold smile finally touched my lips as I stepped into the waiting Blackthorn carriage. The first move was complete. The board was set. The real game was just beginning. The Blackthorn Manor was a fortress of quiet fury. The heavy oak doors closed behind me, shutting out the gawking world, and the silence within was more deafening than the crowd's whispers had been. Servants moved like ghosts, their eyes wide with a mixture of sympathy and fear. The air itself felt thick, waiting for the storm to break. It broke in my father's study. I found him standing before the massive hearth, though no fire burned. His back was to me, his hands clenched into white-knuckled fists at his sides. The portrait of my mother, painted in her youth, seemed to watch from the wall with sad eyes. "Father," I said, my voice soft but clear in the cavernous room. He did not turn. "Tell me you did not know," he commanded, his voice a low rumble of controlled thunder. "Tell me that spectacle was a surprise to you as well." This was the moment. I could play the devastated daughter, seek comfort, and let him direct the wrath of House Blackthorn on my behalf. But that was the path of the old Lyra. The new Lyra did not hide behind her father's robes. "I knew he was leaving," I said, the truth a sharp, clean blade. I did not know for certain why, but I suspected. I ensured we had an audience for his revelation. He turned then, and the look on his face was not one I had ever seen directed at me. It was not anger, but a stark, chilling assessment. The Prime Minister was looking at an unknown variable. "You led the cream of the court to a state seizure to witness your humiliation." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of tactical fact. "I led them to witness his treason," I corrected gently, moving further into the room. "His treason against our family, against the sanctity of a vow made before the crown, and against the Emperor's own justice. He declared a woman from a condemned house his concubine the moment the edict was read. He publicly prioritized his attachment to a traitor's daughter over his duty to you, and by extension, to the Sun King." My father's eyes narrowed. He was a master of statecraft, and I had just reframed a personal scandal into a political indictment. The furious father was receding, replaced by the calculating strategist. "He made it a public matter," I continued, pouring 2 glasses of amber brandy from his decanter and handing one to him. He took it automatically, his gaze never leaving mine. "So, I made certain the public saw the full picture. Pity for the jilted bride is fleeting, father. Contempt for the fool who spurns power is eternal." A long silence stretched between us. He took a slow sip of the brandy. "The Silverwoods will come," he said finally. "Begging. They will cling to that marriage contract like a drowning man to a splinter." "Let them cling," I replied, the ghost of a smile on my lips. A splinter can be used to inflict a great deal of pain. The next week was a study in the anatomy of a social downfall. The story of Lord Kaelin's choice was not just gossip, it was the capital's sole topic of consumption, dissected in every salon, tavern, and guildhall. As I had predicted, Lord Silverwood arrived the very next morning, his face ashen, trailing a mortified Lady Silverwood. My father granted them an audience in the formal receiving room. I observed from the minstrel's gallery above, hidden by a lattice screen. "Alastair, my friend," Lord Silverwood began, his voice trembling. "The boy is a fool, an impulsive, lovesick fool. He is beside himself with regret." It was a moment of madness, a chivalrous impulse gone horribly wrong. My father sat in his high-backed chair, a king on his throne. He said nothing, merely sipped his tea. "The contract," Lady Silverwell pleaded, her hands fluttering nervously. "It is still binding. The wedding can be rescheduled. This unpleasantness will be forgotten." "Will it?" my father asked, his tone deceptively mild. "When your son publicly declared his allegiance to a house condemned by the Sun King himself? My daughter is not some leftover sweetmeat to be taken back after the flies have settled. She is a blackthorn." The finality in his voice was absolute. I saw the hope drain from their faces. But the true reckoning was not in our receiving room, it was in the marble hall of the palace. My father did not need to lift a finger. The court was a pack of wolves, and they had caught the scent of weakness. Ambitious lords who had envied Kaelin's rapid rise saw their chance. Staunch traditionalists were appalled by his flouting of ceremony and loyalty. The emperor's own ministers were furious that Kaelin's dramatic rescue had complicated a clean state action, making the guard look as if they couldn't control a noble's hysterics. Petitions, as I knew there would be, flooded the Sun King's desk. They spoke of contempt for imperial authority, gross instability of character, and conduct unbecoming of a member of the Argent Assembly. I received the news from my maid, Mara, whose network of informants among the servants was more effective than any spy network. "They've stripped him, my lady," she whispered, her eyes alight with vindication as she helped me dress one morning. "Kicked him out of the Argent Assembly on their heels. The emperor himself signed the order." I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. The Argent Assembly was the cradle of future ministers. To be expelled was to be cast out of the garden of power. "And his post?" I asked, my voice calm. "Demoted," Mara said with relish. "From a rising star of the third rank to a clerk in the office of provincial tithes. The eighth rank, can you imagine? He'll be counting sacks of grain from the hinterlands." It was a devastating, almost comical fall. The man who had once advised the emperor on matters of state would now be auditing tax rolls. The irony was perfect. The final blow came to his family. The Sun King, in a move that demonstrated his displeasure extended to the entire house of Silverwood, publicly reprimanded Lord Silverwood for failing to instill proper discipline and loyalty in his heir and docked a year's worth of his salary. It was a financial sting, but the social wound was mortal. They were now a family to be pitted and avoided. I decided a walk in the royal gardens was in order. I dressed not in mourning colors, but in a deep, confident emerald green. I needed to be seen. I needed to show the world that Lyra Blackthorn was not broken, but transformed. As I strolled along the manicured paths, the reactions were a testament to my victory. The sycophants who had once flocked to me now offered hesitant, respectful nods. The matrons who loved tragedy looked almost disappointed by my composure. And then, I saw them. Kaelin and Alara. They were a stark contrast to the vibrant garden. He was dressed in the simple, undecorated wool of a minor functionary, a world away from the silks and velvets of the lord I had almost married. Alara clung to his arm, her own gown a modest, grey thing, a far cry from the delicate fashions she had once favored. They looked small. Ordinary. Our paths converged near the fountain of the laughing sprites. There was no avoiding it. Kaelin's eyes met mine. The summer blue was clouded with shock and a dawning, helpless anger. He saw me standing there, whole and unbroken, dressed in the colors of life and growth, while he was shrouded in the gray of his own failure. Alara looked at me, and for a fleeting moment, I saw not the pitiful victim, but a sharp, calculating resentment. She knew. She knew that my very existence in that moment was a judgment upon them. We did not speak. What words could possibly be exchanged? He had chosen his path, and I had set him upon it. As I passed them, I offered the faintest, most polite of smiles, the kind one gives a stranger. It was not a smile of forgiveness, or of gloating. It was a smile of dismissal. I continued my walk, the sound of the fountain's laughter echoing behind me. The first and most satisfying part of my revenge was complete. He had his precious Alara. And the price had been his entire future. But as I breathed in the scent of blooming jasmine, I knew this was only the beginning. A cornered animal is at its most dangerous. And I had just backed a wolf into a very small, very public cage. The days following Kalen's very public downfall were a curious blend of silence and roaring activity within House Blackthorn. My father, once the storm of his initial fury had passed, seemed to be watching me with a new, speculative interest. The shattered pieces of my betrothal were swept away, and in its place, a quiet, steely determination settled over the household. We were moving on. Or so I thought. I was in the sun-drenched conservatory, attempting to lose myself in the pages of a botanical compendium, when the first discordant note sounded. It was not a sound that belonged in our serene world, the distant, brash blare of a trumpet, followed by the rhythmic, arrogant beat of a drum. Mara, who had been arranging a vase of winter blooms, froze, her head cocked. What in the world? The sound grew louder, coalescing into a recognizable, if poorly played, wedding march. It was accompanied by the murmur of a gathering crowd. My blood ran cold, not with fear, but with a profound, simmering rage. I knew that arrogance. I knew that blind, foolish sense of entitlement. I rose, my book forgotten on the velvet cushion, and walked to the large arched window that overlooked the main thoroughfare. The sight that met my eyes was so absurd it was almost laughable. There, arrayed before our main gate, was a procession. A garish, pathetic parody of a betrothal procession. Kalen sat astride his chestnut stallion, dressed not in the somber robes of a disgraced clerk, but in a flamboyant, crimson doublet that screamed of trying too hard. His face was set in a mask of determined charm, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the frantic gleam in his eyes. Behind him, servants carried painted chests, the betrothal gifts. They were numerous, I'd give him that, but they lacked the quiet, assured quality of his previous offerings. These were loud, gaudy, a desperate man's idea of wealth. And trailing at the very back of this sad parade, her head bowed but her posture radiating a smug sort of victory, was Alara. My fingers curled around the windowsill, the wood biting into my palms. He wouldn't, Mara breathed, coming to stand beside me, her face a thundercloud. The gall of that man. The absolute, unmitigated gall. My lady, shall I have the guards drive them off? No, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Not yet. I want to hear what he has to say. I swept out of the conservatory and down the grand staircase, Mara sputtering indignantly behind me. I did not run. I moved with the deliberate pace of a queen approaching her throne. By the time I reached the massive oak doors, the household guard was already assembled, their hands on their hilts, looking to me for instruction. I nodded. Open them. The doors swung inward, revealing the full spectacle. The street was packed with commoners and lower nobles, drawn by the commotion. Kalen's eyes lit up as he saw me, mistaking my appearance for acquiescence. He dismounted with a flourish and strode forward, that old, charming smile plastered on his face. It didn't reach his eyes. Lyra, he called out, his voice too loud, too hearty. You've been naughty, my love. I told you to wait for me to finish my business, and you caused such a scene. He chuckled, a hollow, grating sound. But I know you were angry, so I'll let the past be the past. I have come again, to ask for your hand. This will surely quell all those ugly rumors about your abandoned wedding. Aren't you happy, Lyra? The audacity was breathtaking. It was a performance crafted for the crowd, an attempt to rewrite history, to paint me as a petulant child and himself as the magnanimous, forgiving lover. Before I could eviscerate him with a reply, Mara stepped forward, her small hands balled into fists on her hips. Bah! Who do you think you are, calling my lady by her name, you faithless polecat? A titter ran through the crowd. Kalen's smile faltered. I placed a gentle hand on Mara's arm, pulling her back. My gaze never left Kalen. Let the past be the past? I repeated, my voice low and carrying. Are you even worthy, Kalen? I took a step forward, onto the top step, looking down at him. It was by my approval that you had a marriage contract with me. Without it, you would not have been qualified to darken my doorstep, let alone share my name. You, a disgraced 8th-rank clerk, who publicly championed a traitor's daughter over the Prime Minister's heir. You think this gaudy parade, can erase that? His mask of charm finally cracked, revealing the raw frustration beneath. Lyra, be reasonable. I am being exceedingly reasonable, I cut him off, my tone turning to ice. I am reasonable in not having you and your entourage thrown into the gutter where you belong. Guards. At my command, a dozen of my house guards, big men armed with thick wooden clubs, stepped forward in a solid, intimidating line. Throw this riffraff out, I commanded, my voice ringing in the sudden silence. If they resist, break their legs. The guards advanced. The crowd gasped and surged back, a mix of horror and delight on their faces. Kalen's confidence shattered into panic. He backpedaled, his eyes wide. At his frantic signal, Alara broke from the back of the procession. She rushed forward and threw herself to her knees on the cold stone steps, her hands clasped in a parody of supplication. Sister, she wailed, the sound gratingly theatrical. Please, do not be angry with my husband. It is all my fault. I have wronged you both. She began to sob, loud, messy tears. Sister, my husband truly loves you. Even after you caused him to be dismissed from the assembly, he never blamed you. He has prepared these lavish gifts to propose again. If you cannot tolerate my presence, then as long as you agree to marry him, I will go to a nunnery and never, ever return. It was a masterstroke of manipulation, designed to paint me as the cruel, jealous shrew standing in the way of true love and self-sacrifice. I saw the calculation in her teary eyes. Mara was practically vibrating with fury. What a shameless pair of adulterers. It's bad enough you're shacked up without a proper marriage, but now you're trying to drag my lady down into your filth. Who would want to marry into your cesspit of a family except a wretch like you? Beat them, I repeated, my voice flat and final. Throw them all out. The guards moved in. One raised his club towards Alara, not to strike her, but to push her aside. Kalen, in a burst of instinct, lunged forward and pulled her into his arms, taking the brunt of the shove on his own shoulder. He grunted in pain, stumbling back. Our eyes met over her head. His were filled with a bewildered, furious hurt. He couldn't comprehend this. He, the future minister, the emperor's favorite, was being manhandled by guards on the street. Lyra, he shouted, his voice raw. Don't forget. Our marriage contract has not been nullified. I let a slow, cold smile spread across my lips. So what? I asked, the question dripping with disdain. My mother has sent people to your house 3 times to return the betrothal gifts and retrieve the contract. You have refused every time. You cling to it like a drowning rat to a piece of driftwood. I took one last, sweeping look at him, holding his beloved, and the pathetic, scattered chests of gifts. It won't save you, I said, my voice dropping so that only he could hear. It only proves how desperate you are. I turned my back and walked into the house, the sound of the scrambling, shouting retreat a sweet symphony behind me. The great oak doors closed, shutting out the noise, the spectacle, and the man who was quickly learning that the woman he had burned was made of colder, harder stuff than he could ever imagine. As the bolt slid home with a definitive thud, I knew this was far from over. He had shown his hand. He was desperate, and he was clinging to the one piece of paper he thought could save him. I would have to find a way to burn that, too. The air in my mother's private solar was thick with the scent of dried lavender and simmering fury. She paced before the hearth, a letter crumpled in her hand like a slain bird. They refuse, she bit out, her voice trembling with a rage so pure it was almost admirable. Lady Silverwood had the temerity to claim the contract is a sacred bond and that the children must be given time to reconcile. Reconcile? As if you would ever sully yourself with that turnip-counting clerk? I offered mildly from my seat by the window, not looking up from my embroidery. I was stitching a particularly intricate phoenix, its wings a cascade of crimson and gold thread. A faint smile touched her lips, but it was gone in an instant. This cannot stand, Lyra. Every day that contract exists, it is a leash he believes he can yank. I will go to the Empress. I will have her annul it herself. We will find you a new match, a better one, and finally be shot of that venomous family. Before she could ring for a servant to ready her carriage, a different missive arrived. This one was borne on parchment of cream and gold, sealed with a distinctive, complex sigil of the jade consort. My mother broke the seal, her eyes scanning the elegant script. Her frown deepened. It seems the court has decided to involve itself, she said, her voice tight. She passed me the letter. It was an invitation. A flower viewing party at the consort's private gardens. My name was listed prominently among the guests. It's a trap, Mara whispered, hovering at my shoulder. Of course it is, I said, setting the embroidery hoop aside. The phoenix's eye, a single jet-black bead, seemed to stare back at me with cold intent. The consort is Prince Valerius's mother. Kaelin has clearly thrown his lot in with them, and they see value in reforging his link to House Blackthorn. They will use the full weight of courtly opinion to bend me to their will. My mother's gaze was sharp. Then we will decline. A sudden illness. No, I said, standing and smoothing the folds of my gown. If I hide, it gives them power. It suggests I am too wounded to face them. I must go. I must stand in that garden and show them all that Lyra Blackthorn cannot be bent, especially not by a man who has already proven himself to be sand. My mother studied me for a long moment, then gave a single, sharp nod. Very well. But you will not go unarmed. The Jade Consort's gardens were a masterpiece of controlled nature. Artfully stunted trees wept blossoms over ponds filled with jewel-toned fish, and every path was designed to offer a perfect, picturesque view. The air hummed with the murmured conversation of the most eligible sons and daughters of the nobility, all preening and posturing under the watchful eyes of their chaperones. I had chosen my armor with care, a gown of deep sapphire blue, the color of a midnight sky, severe and elegant. It held no frills, no flounces. It was a statement of cool composure. I felt the weight of stares as I entered, some pitying, some curious, many gleefully anticipatory. They were all waiting for the show. For a time I was left alone, a small island of quiet in the sea of tittering gossip. I admired a bush of winter-blooming camellias, their blood-red petals a stark contrast to the manicured green. I knew it was only a temporary reprieve. It came when the consort herself made her entrance. She was a vision in jade silk, her beauty sharp and ageless, her eyes missing nothing. She moved through the crowd like a serene predator, bestowing smiles and nods, until her path inevitably led to me. My dear Lyra, she said, her voice a silken caress. She took my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. How lovely you look. Though it pains me to see such a radiant flower without a partner to admire her. The crowd around us stilled, ears straining. Your Highness is too kind, I replied, dipping into a perfect curtsy. I find I am admiring the gardens quite well on my own. Her smile was a razor wrapped in velvet. I hear your mother has been concerned for your future. A broken engagement, even one so dramatic, can cast a long shadow. How about I act as a matchmaker for you? It would be my pleasure to see you well settled. Before I could formulate a polite refusal, she beckoned with a single, languid finger. From behind a topiary sculpted into a soaring hawk, a figure emerged. Kaelin. He was dressed again in the finery of a lord, no doubt provided by his new patron. He looked handsome, remorseful, and utterly determined. He bowed deeply to the consort, then turned to me, his eyes wide with manufactured sincerity. Lyra, he breathed, as if my name were a prayer. The consort looped her arm through mine, a gesture that felt more like a restraint than a comfort. Lyra, you are the daughter of House Blackthorn. I know you and Kaelin had a small disagreement, but what man of spirit does not have a few diversions? She chuckled, a sound like tinkling bells. A concubine is nothing more than a pet, my dear. To be angry with your future husband over such a trifle is to miss the point of a good marriage. She swept a hand towards Kaelin, presenting him like a prize stallion. He is talented. He is handsome. And he is, I am assured, deeply in love with you. He knelt before me for half a day, begging for my intercession. I was so moved. If you let this opportunity for reconciliation slip away, you may regret it for the rest of your life. The pressure was immense. The entire garden was watching, hanging on her every word. This was the power of the court, not the loud confrontation of the streets, but the soft, insidious force of expectation and reputation. Today, the consort concluded, her voice dripping with false benevolence, will you, for my sake, reconcile with him? On cue, Kaelin stepped forward. In his hands was a single, perfect bloom, a midnight orchid, rare and exquisite. He bowed, offering it to me, his face a masterpiece of cautious hope. Lyra, he said, his voice projecting to ensure everyone heard. I was wrong. I will accept any punishment you see fit. I only ask for another chance. He looked directly into my eyes, his gaze intense. My feelings for you are as clear as the sun and the moon. If there is any falsehood in my words, may I be struck by lightning and die a horrible death. A sigh rippled through the noble ladies. It was a grand, romantic gesture. He had sworn a powerful oath, thrown himself on my mercy, and done it all under the approving gaze of a royal consort. To refuse now would be to spit in the face of the court itself. It would brand me not as strong, but as irredeemably bitter and cruel. I looked from his pleading face to the consort's smug smile, to the enraptured, judgmental crowd. They had backed me into a corner, certain I had no escape. So I gave them one. I let my eyes well with tears, not of forgiveness, but of profound, wounded dignity. My lower lip trembled, just slightly. "Kalen," I whispered, my voice choked. "Is this your sincerity? To humiliate me time and time again?" I gestured around us, at the sea of faces feasting on our drama. How can I dare to accept such sincerity? I turned to the consort, dipping into another, deeper curtsy. "Your Highness, please forgive me. I understand your good intentions. My issue with Kalen has nothing to do with his concubine. I do not care about her." I let my voice strengthen, lacing it with a steel that belied my teary eyes. "But I cannot accept a love that repeatedly disregards my dignity. I must take my leave." I turned to go, a single, perfect tear tracing a path down my cheek. It was the performance of my life. But Kalen was faster. He grabbed my wrist, his grip firm. "Lyra, what must I do for you to forgive me?" he pleaded, his voice raw with a desperation that was, for the first time, entirely real. I looked at him, then at the ornamental pond nearby, its surface littered with fallen petals. I pointed a trembling finger. "Jump in." I had barely finished the two words before he moved. There was a tremendous splash. Kalen, in his fine clothes, landed in the middle of the koi pond, sending the jeweled fish scattering. He flailed, gasping and choking on the murky water. He wasn't a strong swimmer. He thrashed towards the surface, his hair plastered to his forehead, and sputtered, "Lyra." I jumped. "See? I did it." The garden was in an uproar. Ladies shrieked. Men laughed. The consort's face was a frozen mask of disbelief. I looked down at his pathetic, floundering form, a small, cold sense of satisfaction warming the ice in my veins. I finished my sentence, my voice clear and calm, carrying over the chaos. "And drown. Then I'll forgive you." The silence that fell was absolute. Kalen stopped flailing, his face a picture of stunned betrayal. The consort looked as if she'd been slapped. I didn't wait for his rescuers to finally, hesitantly, wade in to pull him out. I didn't wait for the condemnation or the applause. I simply turned, my sapphire skirt swirling around me, and walked away from the garden, leaving the dripping, shivering embodiment of my revenge and a thoroughly outmaneuvered royal consort in my wake. The path to my carriage had never felt so smooth. The fallout from the consort's garden was a peculiar kind of victory. I was not praised, of course. Among the court, I was now that blackthorn girl, sharp-tongued, unforgiving, and dangerously unpredictable. But the pity was gone, replaced by a wary respect. More importantly, Kalen's grand romantic narrative had been publicly drowned in a koi pond. The story now was of his pathetic flailing, not his devotion. He fell gravely ill from the chill, or so the rumors said. Mara reported it with grim satisfaction. Serves the turncoat right. A little lung rot might cool his ambitions. But I knew better. A man like Kalen, with the fire of a past life's triumph still burning in his gut, would not be cooled so easily. He had been humiliated, and a humiliated man with a powerful patron is a weapon waiting to be aimed. The invitation from Princess Aurelia to the Temple of the Whispering Stars arrived like a dove of peace amidst the tension. It was for a day of quiet prayer and reflection, a welcome respite from the capital's intrigues. The guest list was small, intimate, and included Lady Seraphina, the formidable daughter of the Sun King's chief general, and Lady Cora, the sweet-natured heiress to the Minister of Works. My mother saw it as a blessing. Good. A day with Aurelia and those girls will do you wonders. It's beyond the reach of court gossip. I saw it for what it was, the perfect stage for the next act. A remote temple, a select group of high-value noble daughters, and a known, predictable schedule. If one wanted to stage a dramatic rescue, to indebt powerful families, this was the opportunity. I will go, I told my mother, already planning. I would not be a pawn in someone else's game. I would be the player who overturned the board. The Temple of the Whispering Stars was carved into the side of a mist-shrouded mountain, a place of ancient stone and hushed reverence. The air was thin and cold, scented with pine and incense. Princess Aurelia, a gentle soul with eyes too wise for her years, led us in prayers for the coming season. I went through the motions, my senses stretched taut, watching not the altars, but the shadows between the pillars. After the formal rites, Serafina, Cora, and I drifted away from the main group, seeking a quieter courtyard overlooking the plunging valleys below. Serafina moved with a warrior's grace, her gaze as sharp as a hawk's. Cora, meanwhile, chattered happily about the beauty of the stained glass windows. It's so peaceful here, Cora sighed, settling onto a stone bench. You can almost hear the gods breathing. All I hear is the wind, Serafina said, her eyes scanning the tree line. And it's telling me to be ready for a storm. I smiled faintly. She was as perceptive as I remembered from my past life. We shared a platter of honeyed nuts and spiced wine a temple acolyte had brought us. The wine was warm, fragrant with cloves and citrus. I took a small, cautious sip, letting the liquid barely touch my lips. Serafina, following my lead, did the same. Cora, less wary, drank hers down with a grateful smile. The dizziness hit me with a subtle, insidious warmth. It was not the wine. It was the scent of the cloves, too strong, masking something else. My vision swam. Behind Serafina, I saw a flicker of movement, shadows detaching from deeper shadows, men clad in unrelenting black, short swords strapped to their backs. I met Serafina's eyes. Her hand had already gone to the decorative, but fully functional, dagger she always wore at her hip. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod. She felt it too. Cora, however, slumped forward, her head lolling. I feel so sleepy, she murmured before consciousness left her. Then, the world went dark for me as well. I let it, slumping against the cold stone. It was better to be a conscious captive playing unconscious than to fight a battle already lost. I woke to the smell of damp earth and rotting straw. We were in a woodcutter's hut, deep in the forest surrounding the temple. Rough hemp ropes bit into my wrists, binding me to a central support pillar. Cora was tied beside me, weeping softly. Serafina was on my other side, her body taut as a bowstring, her eyes wide with a terror I knew was feigned. 3 large, rough-looking men stood over us. They smelled of sweat and cheap ale. Our luck is good today, one of them leered, his teeth yellowed and broken. We've caught some rich little songbirds. Look at this tender skin. He ran a grimy finger down Cora's arm, making her whimper. Don't worry, ladies, another chuckled, unbuckling his belt. We'll just have a bit of fun. When we're done, we'll have your families pay a ransom. We won't kill you. He took a step towards me, his intent clear. Your bodies must be so soft. I'll make you even softer. The men laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. One reached for me. Another grabbed for Serafina's gown, trying to tear it. That was his mistake. Before his fingers could even brush the fabric, Serafina moved. Her legs, though bound at the ankles, were free. She kicked out with the force of a battering ram, her boot connecting solidly with the man's groin. He flew backwards with a choked scream, crumpling against the far wall. The hut erupted into chaos. The other 2 bandits lunged for her, drawing their swords. Serafina, using the pillar for leverage, spun her body, her legs a whirlwind of devastating kicks and strikes, knocking one man's sword from his hand and catching the other in the knee with a sickening crack. It was at that moment the door burst open. Seize them. The voice was calm, authoritative. Crown Prince Theron stood framed in the doorway, sunlight glinting off the polished steel of the guards pouring in behind him. His eyes found Serafina first, a flicker of admiration and relief in his gaze before it swept over Cora and me. The fight was over in seconds. The bandits were subdued, the leader forced to his knees. Only one was left alive for questioning. Just as the prince's guards secured the room, another group arrived, breathless and dramatic. Prince Valerius stood there, with Kaelin at his shoulder. They had clearly expected to be the rescuers. They found only the aftermath. Valerius's face was a thundercloud of thwarted ambition. Kaelin's eyes, however, went straight to me, his expression a complex tapestry of confusion, concern, and dawning suspicion. While Valerius went to a sobbing Cora, playing the part of the comforting prince, Kalen broke away and strode to me. "Lyra," he said, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine fear. "Are you all right? The moment I heard you were in trouble, I rushed here. I was so scared." He reached for me, tried to pull me into an embrace, to claim the role of my protector. The smell of him, of his perfume and his hypocrisy, filled my nostrils. All I could see was the flames. I twisted my body and kicked him squarely in the shin. It wasn't a ladle-like tap. It was a sharp, brutal strike that made him gasp and stagger back. "Don't touch me," I snarled, my voice low and venomous. "You disgust me." I didn't wait for his help. Reaching into the secret fold of my sleeve, a trick I had prepared for weeks, I pulled out the small, sharp dagger I kept hidden there. I sawed through the ropes binding my wrists and stood, cutting Cora free as well. Kalen stared, clutching his leg, his face a mask of hurt. But his eyes were locked on the knife in my hand. The pieces were clicking into place in his mind. The composure, the hidden blade, the lack of surprise. "Lyra," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. "Why do you have a knife?" I looked at him, the man who had once held my heart and then my life in his hands. I tilted my head, a cold, mocking smile on my lips. "Guess." His confusion solidified into a terrifying, certain horror. He didn't say another word to me for the entire journey back. But as I was stepping into the Blackthorn carriage, he finally found his voice, his words a hissed accusation that was also a confession. "Lyra," he called out, his eyes burning with a frantic, red-rimmed intensity. "You've come back, too, haven't you?" I paused, one foot on the carriage step. I looked back at him, at the pathetic, desperate figure he cut against the majestic temple backdrop. I kicked him again, this time aiming for the other shin. "Get lost," I said, my voice flat and cold. "If you are sick, go see a doctor. Stop acting crazy in front of me." I disappeared into the carriage, leaving him standing alone. But as the driver clicked the horses into motion, I heard his shout, a raw, possessive cry that followed me down the mountain path. "Lyra, you are mine. We were husband and wife in our past life, and we will be in this one. No one can separate us." I leaned back against the plush cushions, closing my eyes. The trap had been sprung, but I had turned it back on its creators. He knew now. The veil was torn. The war between us was no longer a silent, secret thing. It was declared. And I was ready. The return from the Temple of the Whispering Stars was a somber, stately affair, a far cry from the chaotic flight that had preceded it. The Crown Prince's personal guard escorted our carriages, a clear and unsubtle message to any watching eyes. I rode with Seraphina, the two of us wrapped in a silence that was heavy with unspoken truths. Cora had been taken into the care of Princess Aurelia, her gentle spirit deeply shaken. "You knew," Seraphina said finally, her voice low as the carriage wheels rumbled over the cobblestones. She wasn't looking at me, but out the window at the passing forests. "I suspected," I corrected softly. The invitation was too convenient. The temple, too remote. And the knife? "A woman who has been burned once learns to carry her own fire," I replied, the words tasting like ash. She turned her head, her sharp, intelligent eyes boring into me. "Kalen thinks you've come back from somewhere." What did he mean? I met her gaze squarely. "It means the man I was once to marry is haunted by ghosts of his own making. Pay his ravings no mind." She accepted this with a slow nod. She was a soldier's daughter, she understood that some battles were best fought alone, and some secrets were too heavy to share. "He is a snake," she stated, her voice cold and final. "And Prince Valerius is the charmer who holds his basket. They meant to trap us all today. They failed," I said. "Thanks to you." A faint, grim smile touched her lips. "And you. And the Crown Prince." The way she said his title was different, softer. I remembered, then, the look that had passed between them in the hut. It was not the look of strangers. The failed plot had yielded an unexpected result, it had united a pair of lovers who had been kept apart by politics. The political fallout was swift and brutal. The single surviving bandit, under the skilled persuasion of the Crown Prince's interrogators, did not hold his tongue for long. The chain of command led back to a minor official in Prince Valerius's household, and from there, the trail, while circumstantial, pointed unmistakably upwards. The Sun King was not a man who tolerated threats to the realm's stability, especially those that endangered its most powerful bloodlines. The fact that his own son had orchestrated it was an unforgivable betrayal. We were summoned to the Marble Hall a week later. The air was frigid with tension. The king sat upon the sun throne, his face like granite. Crown Prince Theron stood at his right hand, his expression neutral, but his shoulders were set with a new authority. To the left, Prince Valerius knelt, his head bowed, his complexion pale. I stood with my father, a silent observer in the drama we had helped create. I saw Kaelin standing among Valerius's lesser followers, his face a careful mask, but I could see the panic in the tight line of his shoulders. His ship was sinking, and he was desperately looking for a lifeline. The king's voice echoed in the hall, stripped of all paternal warmth. The plot against the daughters of our most loyal houses is a stain upon this court. It is an act of a man who thinks not of the kingdom, but only of his own ambition. He did not look at Valerius, but everyone knew. The condemnation was absolute. For your role in this sordid affair, the king pronounced, his words falling like stones, you are confined to your estates. You will not set foot outside their boundaries without an express edict from my own hand. You are removed from all councils and stripped of your command of the northern legions. It was a devastating blow. House arrest, the loss of political influence, and most crippling, the loss of his military power. Valerius flinched as if struck. The jade consort, seated in the gallery, looked as if she were carved from the same jade as her namesake, her face a rigid mask of fury and defeat. Then, the king turned his gaze to Theron. The crown prince has proven his worth. Not only in battle, but in judgment and loyalty. It is time he was settled. We hereby decree the betrothal of Crown Prince Theron to Lady Seraphina of House Hawklight. A ripple of approval went through the hall. It was a brilliant move. It rewarded Seraphina's family for their loyalty and bound the might of the military directly to the heir apparent. Seraphina, standing beside her formidable father, did not smile, but the look she shared with Theron was one of fierce, triumphant joy. But the king was not done. His eyes, cold and assessing, fell upon Prince Valerius once more. And to ensure our son Valerius is provided with stabilizing influences, we decree his marriage to Lady Cora of House Hayes to take place immediately. The gasp in the room was audible. Cora was sweet, kind, and from a respectable family, but the Hayes' power was in commerce and infrastructure, not in soldiers. It was a political demotion, a deliberate match to give Valerius a wife who could not bolster his military ambitions. Cora, who had been so terrified in the hut, now looked as if she might faint. She was being given to a man she now knew to be ruthless, as a punishment for him. As the court was dismissed, the crowd swirling with shocked whispers, Kaelin found me. He cornered me near a tapestry depicting the founding of the kingdom, his body blocking me from the main flow of the crowd. You, he hissed, his voice low and ragged. All pretense was gone. The charming lord, the remorseful suitor, had vanished. What was left was raw, exposed, and terrified. You were reborn. Just like me. His expression was a torrent of emotions, grief, nostalgia, and a burning, incredulous anger. Lyra, you hate me, don't you? He didn't wait for an answer. I am sorry. I am so sorry. The rage I had kept on a tight leash since my rebirth finally snapped. My hand flew out, the crack of my palm against his cheek echoing in the alcove. The force of it snapped his head to the side. Do you think a simple sorry can erase everything? I advanced on him, my voice a low, venomous whisper. Do you think it can lift the weight of my father's head from my memory? Or my brother's? Can it silence my little brother's screams as they dragged him away for a treason you fabricated? He stared at me, his cheek blazing red, his eyes wide with shock. Then, to my utter disgust, he lifted his own hand and slapped himself, hard. I was wrong. I deserve to die. Then go and die, I said, without a heartbeat of hesitation. He flinched, stumbling over his words, trying to explain, to justify the unjustifiable. Lyra, I had my reasons. Please, you have to listen. I didn't want to, I cut him off, my finger jabbing into his chest. I don't care about your reasons, Kaelin. Between us, there is only a fight to the death. You have one path left now. The same one you forced the crown prince down in our last life. I saw the understanding dawn in his eyes, followed by sheer terror. He knew what I meant. The path of the desperate, the cornered, the one with nothing left to lose. Rebellion. Lyra, you know that is a path to certain death, he breathed, his face ashen. I smiled then, a cold, brittle thing that held no warmth. Of course I know. I want you to walk it knowing it leads to your death. How else can I honor the souls of the hundreds of members of my family you sent to the pyre and the block? He sighed, a world-weary sound, and reached for my hand as if we were still the lovers we had once been. Lyra, don't be foolish. The fight for the throne is not a game. It is not something you should be involved in. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. It is true the second prince ordered the execution of your family, but he was a diligent and praised ruler. You keep feeding information to the crown prince. But how do you know he won't kill your father and brother once he is on the throne? His audacity was breathtaking. He was trying to manipulate me, even now. House Blackthorn is too powerful, he pressed on, seeing my silence as hesitation. No emperor can tolerate such a presence. I had already asked for clemency from Prince Valerius. As long as you married me once he ascended the throne, if your father was willing to take his own life, he would spare the rest of your family and not harm you. The world seemed to narrow to that single, monstrous sentence. Asterisk if your father was willing to take his own life. Asterisk he had bartered my father's head like a merchant haggling over a bolt of cloth. I stepped back, away from his tainting presence, my whole body trembling with a hatred so pure it was almost holy. What a joke, I said, my voice shaking. A prisoner is demanding my father's life. Kaelin, are you a fool, or do you think I am? His face hardened, the desperation returning. Lyra, Prince Valerius is not completely defeated. Don't be so stubborn. He gave a sharp, subtle signal. From the shadowed pillars, a group of his household guards, men whose loyalty he had bought with promises from a prince who was now himself a prisoner, appeared, surrounding us. Take her away, Kaelin commanded, his voice suddenly calm and chillingly familiar. It was the voice of the minister he had been. The maid, too. He looked at me, his eyes pleading and commanding all at once. Lyra, be good. After this is over, I will let you out and we will be married. His guards moved in, their grips firm and impersonal. As they led me away, I did not struggle. I did not scream. I met Kaelin's gaze and held it, letting him see the absolute, unwavering promise in my eyes. He had just made the final, fatal mistake of his life. He had taken me off the board, but in doing so, he had forgotten one crucial thing: a caged phoenix is still a phoenix. And we are born of fire. The world shrank to a windowless room. The air was still and cool, smelling of old stone, dried herbs, and dust. It was not a dungeon, that would have been too crude, too obvious. This was a secret chamber, hidden within the bowels of the Silverwood estate, fully furnished with a canopied bed, a carved wooden chest, and even a small writing desk. A gilded cage, prepared in advance. He had always meant to bring me here. Mara was shoved in beside me, her face pale but her eyes blazing with a fury that mirrored my own. The heavy door, a near seamless piece of the wall, thudded shut, plunging us into near darkness before Kaelin lit an oil lamp. The flickering light danced over his face, highlighting the frantic determination in his eyes. I'm sorry for the roughness, Lyra, he said, his voice unnervingly calm. It will only be for a little while. Just until things are settled. He visited often after that, a ghost haunting my prison. He would bring things, a bouquet of wild winter violets, their purple heads drooping. Do you remember, he'd say, his voice soft with a manufactured nostalgia, the field behind the summer palace? You filled your apron with these. You said they were the color of twilight, and you wanted to wear the sky in your hair. He smiled, a sad, distant thing. I wrote a poem for you that day. My love wears the dusk upon her brow. I said nothing. I turned my back, the memory a shard of glass in my soul. That girl was dead. He had killed her. Another time, he brought a plate of honey-drenched pastries, flaky and golden. The baker on Ivory Street. You used to love these. I had a servant wait in line for an hour. Taste one, Lyra. For old time's sake. I looked at the pastries, then at him. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up the plate and overturned it, sending the sweets tumbling to the floor. The sticky honey pooled on the stone like amber blood. His face fell, a child denied a treat. But he didn't get angry. He just sighed, a long, suffering sound. You'll remember. In time, you'll remember how it was between us. Before. Everything. His monologues continued, a torturous litany of our past. He spoke of the letters we exchanged, the jokes we shared, the way I'd laughed at a foolish play we'd seen together. He was trying to rebuild the woman I had been, brick by painful brick, within these four walls. He was trying to resurrect his greatest supporter, his most devoted fool. I endured it in silence, a statue gathering dust. I ate the plain food he brought, drank the water, and waited. I counted the lamp-oil cycles, marking the passage of days on the leg of the bed with a sharpened sliver of wood I'd pried from the chest. 7 days. He was growing more anxious, his visits more frequent, his speeches more desperate. On the 7th day, he arrived not with flowers or food, but with a chest. He opened it with a reverence usually reserved for holy relics. From within, he drew out folds of fabric the color of fresh blood, embroidered with phoenixes and thread of gold. My wedding dress. The one I had worn in that other life, when I had walked to him with a heart full of love and a future bright with promise. He held it up, the lamplight catching the gold threads, making the phoenixes seem to writhe. This is the dress you wore when you married me, Lyra. You were so beautiful. The most beautiful thing I had ever seen. His voice was thick with emotion. After tonight, after everything is settled, let's get married again, shall we? A fresh start. A new beginning for us. He didn't wait for an answer. He was too agitated, his eyes darting towards the door as if he could hear a clock ticking that was inaudible to me. He laid the dress carefully on the bed, a splash of violent color in the drab room. I must go. But I will return for you. Wait for me. He left in a hurry, the door sealing shut behind him, leaving me alone with the ghost of my former self. The silence that followed was different. It was pregnant with impending chaos. I pressed my ear to the cold stone of the door. At first, nothing. Then, distant shouts. The clash of steel. A scream abruptly cut off. The battle had come to him. It felt like an eternity, but the markings on the bed leg told me it was less than half an hour before the door groaned open again. Kalen stood there, silhouetted by the torchlight from the corridor beyond. But he was not the composed man who had left. He was a ruin. His fine clothes were torn and splattered with dark, wet blood. A gash on his forehead dripped a crimson line down his temple. He leaned heavily against the doorframe, his eyes wide with a disbelief so profound it bordered on madness. I locked her up, he whispered, not to me, but to the fates that had betrayed him. How could we still fail? He staggered into the room, his gaze falling on the wedding dress. The sight of it seemed to galvanize him, to drag him back from the brink of shock. The madness solidified into a single, obsessive purpose. Juliana, he breathed, using the name from that other life, the one he had screamed as I burned. We will be married. Once we are husband and wife, I will take you back to your family. Your father won't let you be without a husband. He lunged for the dress, grabbing it and lurching towards me. Juliana, Juliana, please put on the dress. I know you love me more than anyone and I love you more than anyone. Let's get married right now. He was a madman, his only thought to force me into the silken skin of my own funeral shroud, to enact the ceremony that had been the beginning of my end. When I sidestepped his clumsy grab, he snarled and tried again, his blood-slicked hand closing on my arm. But before he could touch me, a booted foot connected with his side with a sickening thud. He was thrown across the room, crashing into the wall and slumping to the floor, coughing and spitting blood. Lady Seraphina stood in the doorway, a sword in her hand, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a warrior's fire. She looked from Kalen's writhing form to me. Lyra, she said, her voice crisp and clear. What should we do with this dog? I looked at Kalen, at the man who had been my past, my present, and the architect of my future. He was weeping now, pathetic, bloody tears of pain and loss. All his power, all his plans, had crumbled to dust around him. The vengeance I had craved felt hollow in that moment, but the justice remained. I walked towards him, my steps echoing in the small, stone room. I knelt, so our eyes were level. I saw the fear in his, the final, dawning understanding of his utter defeat. I said only 2 words. Burn him. Seraphina didn't hesitate. She found a coil of rope in the chest and, with efficient, brutal moves, tied his hands and feet. He didn't even struggle, his spirit broken. She dragged him out of the chamber, his body leaving a smeared trail of blood on the stone floor. I followed them out into the corridor. The Silverwood household was a scene of controlled purging. Soldiers bearing the Hawklight sigil stood guard over huddled groups of servants. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Serafina dragged Kalen through the familiar halls, now foreign with occupation, and into the very room he had locked me in during our past life, the room where he had set the fire. It was a study, once. Now, it was a tomb. At my direction, Serafina's soldiers doused the heavy velvet curtains and the dry, wooden desk with lamp oil. The acrid scent filled the air, a horrifyingly familiar perfume. Kalen, lying on the floor, was no longer mad. He was just a man, broken and weeping. Lyra, we were both reborn. You were just a sheltered wife. I was a third-rank official, trusted by the Emperor. How could I lose to you? How could I lose? He couldn't understand. The game he thought he was playing was not the one I had been fighting. I knelt before him one last time, a lit candle in my hand. The flame danced, a tiny, eager thing. Because you are too greedy, I told him, my voice flat and final. You wanted power, fame, and love. But I am different. The only thing I wanted was for you to die. The truth, so simple and so absolute, seemed to shatter the last of his sanity. He clutched his head, a low moan escaping his lips. So that is how it was. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading for one last shred of mercy, one final lie to comfort him. Lyra, if I hadn't abandoned you for Alara at our wedding, would you have? Could you ever have forgiven me? I looked into the eyes of the man who had murdered my family and burned me alive. There was not a single flicker of doubt in my soul. No, I answered. I would never have forgiven you. Never. I touched the candle to the oil-soaked curtains. They caught with a soft whoosh, the fire spreading with a hungry roar, just as it had before. I tossed the candle aside and turned to leave. Behind me, Kalen screamed my name. He begged, he pleaded, he sobbed that he was wrong. The screams turned to agonized cries, the same sounds I had made in that other life, in this very room. The flames licked at his fine clothes, at his skin. His last words were a choked, desperate whisper that barely reached me over the roar of the fire. Lyra. I know how much it hurt. I am sorry. I didn't answer. I walked out of the room and didn't look back. When the fire had done its work, consuming only what it was meant to, I had the soldiers put it out. The one who deserved to die had to burn. The rest of the house, and the future it represented, would remain. The walk away from the burning room was the longest of my life. Each step felt like wading through deep water, the echoes of Kalen's final, agonized screams seeming to cling to the stone walls, chasing me down the corridor. The scent of charring silk and something darker, more organic, filled the air, a horrifying perfume I would carry with me forever. I did not look back. I had already seen that play, and I had no desire to watch the final act again. Outside the room, the hallway was a study in controlled chaos. Serafina's soldiers, efficient and grim, were securing the last of the Silverwood household guards. The fight was over. Prince Valerius's rebellion, forced into the open prematurely and stripped of its key strategist, had been crushed within the walls of his strongest supporters' home. I learned later that Valerius himself, seeing his forces routed and his ambitions turned to ash, had chosen a clean blade over a dirty executioner's axe, falling on his own sword in his study. Serafina stood waiting for me, her sword sheathed, her face smudged with soot and a spray of blood that was not her own. She said nothing, merely fell into step beside me, a solid, silent presence as we navigated the now familiar halls. We emerged into the main courtyard, where the cold night air was a brutal, cleansing shock to the lungs. The scene was one of decisive victory. Hawklight soldiers stood in disciplined ranks, their torchlight glinting off polished breastplates. In the center, Crown Prince Theron was receiving reports from his captains. He looked up as we approached, his gaze finding Serafina first, a look of profound relief passing between them before his eyes settled on me. He took in my appearance, the simple, dusty gown, the hands clenched at my sides, the absolute, unnerving calm that I knew masked a soul-deep exhaustion. He didn't ask if I was all right. He simply gave a short, respectful nod. It was an acknowledgement between allies, between those who had stared into the same abyss and done what was necessary. It is done, he stated, his voice carrying the weight of a changed world. It is done, I echoed, my own voice sounding thin and far away. He gestured to a nearby carriage, the blackthorn crest gleaming on its door. Your father is waiting for you at the palace. The king, my father, wishes to speak with us all. The ride to the palace was a silent, phantom journey through a city holding its breath. Dawn was just beginning to bleed at the edges of the sky, painting the world in shades of bruised purple and gray. The capital was quiet, but it was the quiet of a beast that had just survived a fight, licking its wounds and waiting to see who its new master would be. We were ushered not into the grand marble hall, but into the king's private solar. The Sun King looked older, the lines on his face carved deeper by the betrayal of his own son. He sat by a roaring fire, a heavy fur robe draped over his shoulders. My father stood beside him, and the look he gave me was one of such complex emotion, pride, grief, fear, and a dawning, terrible understanding, that I had to look away. The king dismissed the formalities. The second prince is dead by his own hand. His primary supporter, Lord Kalen Silverwood, is also dead. The conspiracy is broken. His weary eyes found me. We are told we have you to thank for much of this intelligence, Lady Lyra. You saw the snake in the grass when the rest of us were admiring the flowers. I bowed my head. I only did what I believed was necessary to protect my family and the crown, Your Majesty. A necessary thing is not always a clean one, the king said, his gaze seeming to see right through me, to the soot and the screams still clinging to my soul. You have the gratitude of the crown. Name your reward. This was the moment. The pivot upon which my future, and the future of my house, would turn. I lifted my head and met his gaze squarely. Your Majesty, I have only one request. I wish to ask for a pardon of immunity for House Blackthorn. The silence in the room was absolute. The fire crackled. My father drew in a sharp, quiet breath. The new crown prince, Theron, who had been standing quietly by the window, turned to look at me, a slight frown of displeasure on his face. Gideon, the Sun King, leaned forward, his expression unreadable. Immunity? From what? From the suspicion that inevitably follows power, I said, my voice steady despite the hammering of my heart. From the fear that a crown can harbor towards the tree that shades it. The king's eyes narrowed. It was Theron who spoke, his voice calm but firm, the voice of a king in waiting. Lady Lyra, you have performed a great service, and I will be honest with you. The power of House Blackthorn is too great. I was born into the nobility, but I do not wish to share my rule with them. Do you understand? There it was. The truth I had known in my bones, the truth Kalen had thrown in my face. No emperor could tolerate such a presence. I had saved my family from a traitor's pyre only to deliver them into the crosshairs of a wary new monarch. I nodded, my heart a cold, hard stone in my chest. I understand, Your Majesty. I looked from the young prince to the old king. Then I will ask for a different boon. I will ask for your blessing. I will ask my father to resign from his post as Prime Minister and retire to our country estates. House Blackthorn will withdraw from the center of power. The shock in the room was palpable. My father stared at me, but I saw the slow, grim acceptance in his eyes. He was a politician. He knew this was the only move left that guaranteed our survival. Prince Theron studied me, his frown deepening into thought. He had expected a demand for land, for a title, for a new, advantageous marriage. He had not expected a voluntary surrender. It disarmed him. It proved our loyalty more than any oath ever could. After a long moment, he glanced at his father, who gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. A magnanimous offer, Theron said carefully. And one that demonstrates a loyalty we would be fools to spurn. He paused, then offered a concession, a king's first lesson in the art of rewarding clever subjects. Very well. I agree. Your father may retire with full honors. And as a mark of my trust, your elder brother may keep his commission in the royal guard. Your younger brother may remain in the capital to continue his studies. He will be welcome to take the imperial examinations in the future. It was more than I had hoped for. A path forward. A future for my brothers, untainted by the shadow of a father who had been too powerful for too long. Thank you, Your Majesty, I said, dipping into a deep, final curtsy. As we were dismissed and turned to leave, the first true rays of the morning sun broke through the windows, painting the room in gold. I walked out of the palace between my father and Seraphina, leaving the scent of smoke and politics behind. On the steps, Seraphina turned to me. The rising sun set her hair ablaze, a warrior goddess born from the night's carnage. You have achieved so much, she said, her voice soft with a strange wonder. Yet you are leaving with your entire family. Juliana, are you truly content with this? I looked out over the waking city, at the rooftops gleaming in the new light. The vengeance was complete. The debt was paid. But the life I had lived before, the life of the sheltered wife, the political hostess, was ashes. There was no going back. I met her gaze, and for the first time since my rebirth, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't cold calculation or burning hatred. It was the faint, fragile warmth of possibility. This is just a temporary retreat, I told her, the ghost of a real smile touching my lips. I am destined for greater things. She smiled back, a fierce, understanding grin. Then I will be waiting. She turned and walked back into the palace, towards her prince, her throne, her future. I watched her go, then turned towards the waiting carriage, towards my father, towards the quiet of the countryside. The phoenix had risen from the ashes of her past. Now, it was time to build a new nest. The Blackthorn country estate was a world away from the capital's sharp-edged intrigues. Here, the air smelled of turned earth and blooming jasmine, and the loudest sounds were the bees and the clover and the distant song of the reapers. For a year, I let the silence heal me. I walked the fields with my father, his political mantle shed, leaving behind a quieter, more contemplative man. I read books that had nothing to do with statecraft or vengeance. I slept through the night without the smell of smoke in my dreams. But the quiet was not an end. It was a cocoon. The idea began as a whisper, a logical conclusion to the life I had lived and the one I had been forced to endure. What was a woman's worth, if it was tied only to her father's name or her husband's rank? What power was there, if it could be stripped away by a man's betrayal or a king's suspicion? I started small. In the long afternoons, I began tutoring the daughters of our estate's stewards and farmers. Not in embroidery or courtly manners, but in numbers, in logic, in the history of trade laws and the fundamentals of estate management. I saw the spark in their eyes as they grasped a complex concept, the dawning confidence as they realized their minds could be as sharp and potent as any man's. That spark became a flame. I used the remains of my personal fortune, the wealth I had carefully shielded from the turmoil, and founded the Blackthorn Lyceum for Women. It was a modest schoolhouse at first, but its purpose was revolutionary. I hired learned widows and retired female scholars who had been forced to hide their intellect. Our curriculum was a quiet scandal: mathematics, law, economics, natural philosophy, and the strategic arts. In 3 years, the Lyceum's reputation was its own ambassador. It wasn't just that our students were knowledgeable, they were capable. They could audit a ledger, draft a legal brief, and debate political theory. Daughters of minor nobles and wealthy merchants began to arrive, their families intrigued by the prospect of an education that produced not just decorative wives, but formidable partners and managers. The flame reached the capital. The gossip was no longer about the jilted bride or the vengeful daughter, but about the radical school in the countryside and the sharp-minded woman who ran it. It was time to return. I arrived in the capital not as a supplicant, but as an institution. I took a house at the foot of the Imperial Hill and opened a second lyceum, grander and more ambitious. And then, I requested an audience with the Empress. Serafina received me in her sun-drenched solar, a baby prince gurgling on a rug nearby. She was no longer just a general's daughter or a prince's bride, she was the future queen mother, her intelligence, and will now shaping the empire from within. Lyra, she said, her smile warm and genuine. The city has been dull without you. I've been busy, I replied, returning her smile. I laid out my plans for the capital lyceum. I showed her the curricula, the testimonials from provincial lords praising the acumen of their lyceum-educated stewards. And then I made my request. I would be honored if you would consent to be the royal patron of the lyceum, I said. She understood immediately. It was not just an honorific. It was a shield. With the Empress's name attached, the conservative factions at court would hesitate to attack it. It was a political move, and she, of all people, appreciated a good strategy. It would be my honor, she said, her eyes gleaming. An empire is only as strong as the minds of all its people, not just half of them. The lyceum flourished under her patronage. It became the fashionable, yet undeniably serious, place for a young woman of quality to be educated. The crown prince, now Emperor Theron, watched its growth with a cautious but approving eye. He saw it not as a threat, but as a source of capable administrators for his reign, and more importantly, as a project that kept the formidable intelligence of House Blackthorn usefully and peacefully occupied. 3 years after the capital lyceum opened, the change we had wrought could no longer be ignored. The first state examinations open to women were announced. The decree, issued under the seal of the Empress and the Emperor, sent ripples of shock and excitement through the empire. The day the results were posted, a crowd gathered before the Imperial Proclamation Board. I stood with my students, a knot of nervous energy in the crisp morning air. And there, amidst the lists of names, were three of ours: Ilara Vance, no relation to that Vance, top scorer in economic theory; Maria Stoneseer, third in legal jurisprudence; and Lena Quickhand, a merchant's daughter, who had placed seventh in logistics. A cheer went up, not just from my students, but from the crowd. It was the sound of a wall beginning to crumble. Later that evening, I stood on the balcony of my study, looking out at the lanterns being lit across the city. Serafina found me there, a scroll in her hand, the official edict formally opening the lower ranks of the civil service to women. "You did it," she said, her voice full of quiet awe. "You actually did it." We did it, I corrected, turning to her. "I built the school. You gave it the crown's protection. I gestured towards the city, towards the millions of unseen daughters, will do the rest." I looked out once more over the capital, a city that had been the stage for my greatest pain and my most triumphant vengeance. The ghosts were quiet now. The rage that had fueled me for so long had been transmuted, alchemized into something lasting and strong. This world is unfair to women. I had learned that lesson in Blood and Fire. But I had also learned that waiting for the world to become fair was a fool's game. Women must fight for their place in it, must build their own tables rather than begging for a seat at a man's. As for love and romance? I thought of Kaelin, of the all-consuming passion that had curdled into obsession and ruined us both. I thought of the quiet, respectful conversations I now had with a few forward-thinking scholars and lords who saw me as an equal, not a prize. I felt the lingering warmth of the sun on the stone balcony, heard the distant laughter of my students celebrating in the courtyard below. It is good to have love. But it is not necessary. Not when you have a future to build. The past was an ingredient, not the entire formula. And my formula, at last, was my own.